if we can start to think about the body a little differently, it can actually help us with like the actions that we make and the habits that we stick to. One of those being like how we train, nutrition, and recovery. And insulin plays a really big role with this in the body. So I'm hoping to give some context today on what insulin is, how it kind of operates, the benefits that it has, which are many, but then what happens when it gets sort of, overused and like what contributes to the overuse of this. How does it affect fat loss? How does it affect aging? Because it plays a significant role with the cascade, and hopefully give some tangible tools. I'm gonna have to motor through that because as I rattle that off, that's a fair bit to get through in one level up, but we'll see how we go. As always, for those here today, contribute when you like so that we can deep dive in. Hopefully gives you a bit of framework today. So what is it? Well, it's a peptide hormone that's produced in the pancreas, um, and it's in response to blood sugar rising. So typically after we eat, you know, the blood sugar will spike, and the blood sugar spikes because you've eaten something, it's gone to your stomach, it's then gone to your intestines, and then it's been digested through, which means then it's in your bloodstream. And then as it goes into your bloodstream, the glucose that is, it raises the amount of glucose in your blood or your blood sugar level. And in response to this, insulin is released. Um, and it's supposed to regulate your blood sugar so that your blood sugar goes from in your bloodstream into your cells where it can actually be utilized. It's also used in things like fat storage, protein synthesis, and has a really big role in sort of metabolic balance. So, I want to get into the detail today because it's something worth understanding. Insulin's functions are a part of the body's design so that we can actually have available energy, long-term balance with this energy, and it's really important for your long-term survival. So, gets a bad rap, but it's more how we overuse it, which I want to touch on a little bit later. So it's involved in energy distribution. So the body needs glucose, and it needs it needs lots of it. It's actually our primary energy source, and it helps to power every cell in the body. So without insulin, glucose can't actually enter your cells, not very efficiently anyway. So I want you to think like insulin's kind of unlocks the cell, and it does this by activating something called a GLUT4 transporter, which allows glucose to sort of flow in and be used immediately for energy. That's kind of what we needed the glucose for. So without this mechanism, glucose would build up in your bloodstream, which the reason that that's so important, and this happens with diabetics a lot, is it actually just damages the body. So it damages tissues, it damages nerves and blood vessels. And it actually, if this is happening, normally the cell is actually starving of energy, which is really detrimental to your cells. So insulin actually ensures that the excess glucose, not only is it used for energy, it's can be stored for survival, which is good for, a long time ago. A little frustrating these days because most people I talk to don't particularly want to be carrying excess fat, especially around their midsection. First, it'll go into the liver, where it'll get stored, but then it'll go into fat and to energy reserves underneath your skin and as visceral fat surrounding your organs. We'll get to that in a minute. It has a really distinct role in protein synthesis and growth. So insulin actually supports the growth and repair, let's say, by stimulating amino acid uptake into your cells. So that's really important. Each cell needs amino acids to be able to rebuild and repair, to actually help with protein synthesis. It's especially obviously important in muscles to actually repair and recover after an injury. The big one, it's the big metabolic regulator or one of. So it can act as the master regulator for energy storage, and it helps maintain the balance for you in your body between being anabolic, growing, and catabolic, being broken down with different tissues in the body. When people are thinking about building muscle and burning fat, keeping yourself in the right anabolic pathway makes a massive difference. And one of the ways to do that is by regulating and balancing your insulin effectively, something we'll touch on in a minute. So, what happens when we overuse it? Well, plenty. Like chronic overconsumption of, high GI, ultra processed carbohydrate dominant foods, it just creates a really frequent and large blood glucose spike. Think in the morning, toast and jam, think cereal, you know, with an orange juice, you just get a tremendous amount of carbohydrates in those meals just by sheer volume. They also happen to be really quick digesting carbohydrates. So I want you to think, in a big warehouse where carbohydrates, it's just the big roller door at the front of the warehouse going, and everybody can just run out the back or the front. Super easy. Everyone can just run out. It's not very hard. No one's impeded. That's kind of what quick digesting carbohydrates are. They're just really easy for the body to break down and absorb, which the detriment is that it just gives you a really significant quick spike in your blood sugar, which means in response to that, your body has no choice but to then generate lots of insulin to deal with the high spike in blood sugar so that it can get it out of the blood and into the cells, hopefully, or to store it because of the damage that can be done. Over time, this constant blood sugar, like spike, means the body has to make more insulin, and it can lead to sort of hyperinsulinemia, which is just chronically high insulin levels. So let's talk about how this occurs, because this is kind of the road to diabetes. And for a lot of the people that we train, this is what they're trying to avoid. And if you want to have a good quality of life later in life, you want to reduce as many metabolic conditions as possible. We're talking obesity, we're talking heart disease, we're definitely talking diabetes, because they really significantly put your body under stress and they impede health quality as you age. And they'll have some effect on your longevity. So cells have, like, you get a thing called cell, like you just get a desensitization of your cell, really. It just means that they become a bit resistant to your insulin. So all your cells have little insulin receptors, like normally on the surface of the cell. And one of them is called a GLUT4 receptor, which just kind of allows glucose into your cell, which is awesome. That's what they're supposed to do. But when you've got like persistently high levels of insulin, the body starts to sort of down regulate how many are on your cell. So that's not ideal, which means now there's less cells, or sorry, less receptors on your cell to be able to get more blood sugar into the cell. So you just have less numbers over time. It also does other things, like there's pathways, like intracellular pathways that get down regulated as well. So you get less function here, which means you get less signaling in the cell to be able to deal with your insulin. Double whammy. You also get inflammatory responses. So things like excess visceral fat, which is the fat that surrounds your liver and your organs, it's actually quite active, which is unfortunate because most of what it does is it releases things like pro-inflammatory cytokines, which interfere with all sorts of signaling and transporters and actually dish out a whole bunch of pro-inflammatory markers, which then, as a feedback loop, puts more inflammation into the body, which your body recognizes as stress, which then puts more of the visceral fat to produce more inflammatory markers as well. So it's a bit of a positive feedback loop for things that we don't want. Inflammation also affects lots of things in the body. So we're talking mitochondrial function. That means that it's going to reduce the amount of energy availability we've got at any one time. Think being lethargic, think being fatigued, think headaches here can all be a part of what's happening. Last but not least, you get fat accumulation when you have chronically high insulin levels. Like once the liver and your glycogen stores in your muscles are full, your body has nowhere else to put it except for subcutaneous, and visceral fat. So unfortunately, the cycle continues. So what's this cascade look like in simple terms? It's kind of like you get some form of dietary stress, whatever that is, high sugar, low nutritious foods that cause a rapid glucose spike, which kind of just overwhelms the body. So you can't really regulate your blood sugar very well. That kind of leads to a chronic insulin spike. That means the pancreas is trying to respond to glucose spikes by now overproducing insulin. Now we're just like our ratios of efficiency are out. So now we'll just use volume of insulin to try and deal with the problem. Once that happens, then you start to get your receptor down regulation. Too much insulin. Now we'll get rid of some of those GLUT4 receptors, which then starts to impair how much you can have in the cell, which means more in the blood, and you'll get some signaling issues. Then you'll end up being insulin resistant. So the glucose intake is now impaired, and it actually just leaves more circulating in your bloodstream, which can be shown in sort of a glucose fasting test. Once you're in this state, you'll have some level of inflammation, whether it's low grade or chronic, which means you've got more fat cells, and your visceral fat now will be giving you that feedback loop of inflammation. Then, with all of this, you'll have a really depleted nervous system, and you'll have an increased sympathetic nervous system. So chronic stress elevates cortisol, and this just means you have a raise in your blood sugar, because cortisol has a role in gluconeogenesis in the liver. So it's just going to put more into your blood. Elevated cortisol also reduces insulin receptor sensitivity and promotes more fat, which then starts another feedback loop. And this is kind of the cycle of insulin resistance, which is a precursor to diabetes, which is a tough, tough place to be in. So, there's a fair bit going on there, and there was a fair bit of information, but it's kind of important to understand, because as we're sort of framing a meal, there's two ways to look at it. It's either just the high volume, which people think, is definitely a tough issue, but it can be individual with how we view our meals as well. Like, what are the macronutrients that we're doing at any one time? What are the carbohydrate contents of any one meal at any one time? Because there is, unfortunately, just a big cascade of when that happens. So I want to talk about that's insulin resistance. How do we make ourselves more insulin sensitive? Which means you need less insulin to take the amount of blood sugar that's in your blood and put it into the cells. There's a whole bunch of ways to do that, which means now we're going to manage our insulin better with less, which means we put less stress and strain on the body, which means you'll burn fat better, you'll build muscle easier, and you'll have a lot less inflammatory pathways, which means you're going to significantly age better and have a better quality of life. The first one is obviously nutritional adjustments. The first one I want to talk about is protein. Protein, obviously critical for muscle repair, but it plays an amazing role in keeping you satiated. That's one of the big things. It helps stabilize your blood sugar levels. So it actually blunts like a post-meal glucose spike just to how it slows down your digestion, which is really amazing. Like, I want to give it tangible straight away. As a beginner, I would just opt for some lean protein sources in every meal. Chicken, eggs, fish, tofu. I don't mind. Make sure it's in every meal. In terms of fat loss, it means you're going to burn a few more calories digesting. That's great. But the real benefit is in the satiety. It'll keep you fuller for longer, which is going to help reduce your snacking and prevent overeating, which means less glucose spikes. The benefit of more protein is obviously in terms of longevity. Protein preserves more lean muscle mass, and this is critical for maintaining metabolic health, but it's also the more muscle mass you have, the more insulin sensitive you are. And that is one of the real benefits around strength training comparatively to other sources, is how much muscle and how insulin sensitive you are when it's in as a part of your wellness routine. Some advanced protein coaching would be opt for sort of 1.6 to 2.2 grams per kilo of body weight daily. Okay. That's a specific number based on where you're at. And then you would include complementary proteins in your diet and have we call a thing called protein cycling here, which just means different proteins at different times throughout your day and throughout your week to get a full complement of all the different essential amino acids at any one time. When it comes to fat, dietary fat's actually going to modulate your inflammation. It also supports hormonal health really easily, really well, and it slows down gastric emptying as well. All of that helps reduce more glucose spikes, which is really important. My beginner tip would be to just add some omega-3 rich foods into your week. We're talking salmon, we're talking walnuts, we're talking chia seeds. Get them in your diet. You'll feel amazing. My advanced coaching tip would be to really focus on the balance of sort of omega-3 to omega-6. That's really important. You want your omega-3 to 6 ratio to be as close to sort of 1 to 2 as possible. It currently normally sits at like 1 to 20 for the standard diet. And with that kind of ratio, you get a lot of inflammation in the body, which again, you start that negative feedback loop more often than not. Let's talk about the carbs because they get demonized every other day in health and fitness. Just get rid of them. They're no good for you. They're essential for good health and they're a real primary driver of blood glucose and your insulin response. But you just got to choose the right types and at the right times. Like that's what good nutrition's about. Very rarely do I recommend like a super restrictive diet because for the long-term health of somebody, not just their physical health, I mean like their emotional health, their mental health, their social health, like restricting things doesn't tend to put a great relationship with that person and their nutrition. So beginner would be like start with some low GI options. Like we're talking, some sweet potatoes, we're talking some quinoa, some of your grains. It's like keep your carbohydrate portions slightly smaller. So we're talking like a quarter to a third of your plate should be pretty good, or just a good fistful on your plate. This will help your body not have an overbearing ratio of carbohydrates in your diet, and it'll kind of set you up for success. I want most people's carbohydrate intake to sit between sort of 30 and 40%. That's pretty standard as like a balanced macro. When I do food journaling with people, it can be a whopping 70 and above. And it's not the carbohydrates that I mind so much, it's just the volume of carbohydrates to other macros, fats and proteins specifically. If you want advanced coaching, it's like now we're talking about the timing of our carbohydrates. It could be around lunch and dinner being more carbohydrate content. Post training is a really effective way to get the absorption of your carbohydrates in the time that you're most insulin sensitive, which is post training. By having some at dinner, it's also going to really help you sleep at night. So we're trying to utilize our carbohydrates to maximize the benefit of our health. And obviously, quality of food matters. We're talking nutrient dense, whole foods that have plenty of fiber. All of these things minimize your insulin spikes comparatively to the alternative. Two more things. We're talking lifestyle. Now, by that specifically, I mean movement for this specific. So I want to think, what can I do to help get more GLUT4 receptors on my cells so that I can be more insulin sensitive? It's like fantastic. Like beginner coaching would be like just do a couple of sessions a week, probably two. Make sure they're full body. Any resistance training will do 30 minutes. That would be more than enough to start to see that metabolic transformation. Advanced coaching, it's like, cool, now we're on like a 3 to 4 day workout a week, full body, or some form of training split that works for that individual that's advanced. We're going to focus on like tempo and progressive overload, make sure we're challenging ourselves in different modalities so that we can actually challenge, the strength and actually build some hypertrophy in the muscle. And we're going to focus on, some eccentric training, which is just the slowing down portion of the movement, normally the negative portion, because that's going to really help maximize your GLUT4 activation. On the flip, I would do more zone 2 cardio as well. 60 to 70% of your max heart rate, by clearly shown through boundless research to improve your mitochondrial function, your fat oxidation, and your metabolic efficiency. Nothing does it better than zone two training. How would I start that as a beginner? Honestly, I wouldn't really. It would be like, can I have a conversation while doing it? Would probably be enough. It'd be close. Brisk walk every other day for 20 to 30 minutes. That'd be an amazing place to start. For an advanced client, it's like, let's start getting in 45 to 60 minutes of it. Let's really get some heart rate tracking so we can figure out what heart rate we need to be in at that 60 to 70%. And let's stay in zone two. Reminder with zone two is to stay in zone two. Once you're out and you come back in, like if you go from zone two to zone three to zone four, and then you want to come back to zone two, you don't get as much of the benefit of zone two if that's what you're looking for from your zone two training. Okay. And the last but not least is sleep. If you're trying to get on top of your insulin, if you're trying to get on top of anything with your health and wellness, feel free to throw this in as a cheat code. If I was in uni, I'd be throwing in sleep every other exam because it is the best stabilizer that we have. It helps reduce stress. It helps balance hormones. It helps balance out your nervous system from dominant sympathetic and rest and digest parasympathetic to be more at balance. It helps get rid of your metabolic byproducts. It helps repair muscles. It helps with, sweeping out metabolic byproducts from the brain. You name it, sleep does it, or will at least have an effect in benefiting it indirectly. So as a beginner, I do a couple of things. It's like, honestly, try to get to sleep at the same time each day. Try to wind down sort of 30 minutes, potentially 60 minutes before that time. And you should aim for about 7 to 8 hours. I think most people know this, but how many people actually do it? That's another question. Advanced practices would be try to get rid of some like stimulants from midday. It would be try not to have alcohol. It, especially after dinner, significantly impedes the amount of deep sleep you get. I would say have a wind down practice. Anything restorative, could be stretching, could be yoga, could be meditation, could be a sauna, could be a swim. They all work amazingly well. You just got to find what works for you. Going tech free 30 to 60 minutes before bed, unbelievable for helping your brain wind down and not get the blue light. And I like to pair it with what I do, which is magnesium. My best bang for buck all round sub, but it just happens to have a significant impact on sleep. It buffers cortisol. It helps promote things like GABA in the body, and it'll help deepen your sleep and balance out your nervous system. If I was going to take one supplement for my blood sugar, actually two supplements, is before a meal, I'd have a teaspoon diluted in probably 100 ml of water of apple cider vinegar. You get as up much to 50% reduction in your spike of blood sugar with that pre-meal. It also helps improve a bit of digestion, which is a nice added bonus for this topic. And I would take berberine. Berberine is really amazing. It has a mimic effect like I've had a big mental blank. But sorry, it mimics insulin's action. That's what it does. So really important. Berberine, one of the best ways. And if you combine both of them, you'll get a really good drop in your insulin. And all we're trying to do when I'm thinking about insulin is keep it within a range that allows your body to actually perform optimally. And this isn't just insulin, it's actually any hormone. Your body has ranges, optimal, just outside, and like well above. And when you get to things like well above, not only do you get the con of or the negative of it being too high, it's actually the cascade of hormone that I don't like. So let me describe it for you. Once you've digested that really high amount of sugar beverage or meal or whatever it is, highly processed, refined carbohydrates, pretty common, your body digests it really quickly. You get a huge spike in your blood sugar just because it's so easy to digest. Once your insulin's released because it's so high, your body just has signals, which is like, whoa, this is a lot of insulin. Clearly something isn't right. When those alarm bells goes off, now you get cortisol or some adrenaline or another hormone to actually come on in to deal with the perceived stress. It's a dietary stress, but a stress nonetheless. Now for the next few hours, it's not like you immediately just switch things on or off. Your body can't do fat burning and muscle repair or cognitive function nearly as well after the repercussions of that cortisol cascade. Now we've just impaired things for multiple hours, which means less fat burning, less muscle gain, less repair, less hormonal balance, which, if it was every once in a while isn't going to be that big a deal. But if it's breakfast plus a muffin and a bloody stimulant drink for mid morning, if it's, I don't know, a banh mi for lunch, if it's a small bit of cake or, some chocolate in the afternoon with a coffee, if it's now, I don't know, a pizza for dinner, it's like now I've added in 3 or 4 coffees in there because I've had crashes at each one of those meals. Now I don't sleep very well, so I don't get a repair. It's like, how much does each one of those spikes become a chronic spike for the entire day without actually getting a reprieve? And they're pretty, you know, tough like things to attach to because I'm sure you're not doing all of those, but you could still have a similar response with a high carbohydrate diet that lacks protein and good fats and fiber, even if quote unquote your macros are hitting macros, which is one of the reasons I don't tout macros as my favorite way to coach people because you can still hit your macros but not optimize your hormonal health. You can still hit your macros and not have your nervous system in regulation. You can still hit your macros and not do the right things to mitigate your insulin, which is what we're talking about today. So if you think of things from a hormonal standpoint and a nervous system standpoint, more often than not, you'll get the desired result you're after. It very rarely works the other way around. I'm going to open the floor to the two gentlemen that are with me today. Is there anything that stuck out for you today or anything that you want to discuss?
I had to have a chuckle when you talked about sleep, given that you've got two little ones at home. But
Yeah.
I guess you can't control that. I've actually I've started the new place I've moved into because there's a spa and a lap pool. I've been doing a spa and laps before bed. The quality of my sleep has gone through the roof. It's like insanely different. I can't believe the difference it's made. And then just waking up feeling a whole lot better. But also, just in terms of you talking about insulin resistance, I don't get why we don't hear in the medical world or healthcare where I work, we're not talking about insulin resistance. We just people are talking about type 2 diabetes, but I think you said insulin resistance is essentially a precursor for type 2 diabetes, and you don't hear anybody talking about it.
Yeah, like when we do blood work, it kind of looks like you've got high resting glucose, and then once it gets to a certain level, it turns into insulin resistance, and then the next one will be diabetes. And from the stats I've read from the ABS, we've got over 1 million people in this country with either diabetes or insulin resistance, which is a hell of a lot. Which is definitely saying that you can turn around with the basics of health and wellness. Train, sleep, eat, and move better. But yeah, it's one of the sticking points for a lot of people on their progress. Like if they're carrying a little bit of excess around their belly, they're getting huge energy slumps, but they're quote unquote training pretty hard and think they're eating well. A lot of it is in the fact that their insulin's just through the roof all the time, and they're just not pairing the right meals together between proteins, fats, and carbohydrates, and the balance of those. Yeah, we see it a lot. So we can flip the script on what good nutrition looks like and what we're actually trying to eat for. Yeah, it just helps people make better decisions.
So, Sam, I learnt a lot, to be honest. As per our discussion yesterday, I knew nothing about how insulin works. So, one thing, and I'm going to watch this again, but you're talking about the berberine. I didn't quite pick up. So, I've never heard of it before.
Hmm.
When were you suggesting that you utilize that?
You can take it anytime from once daily to every meal.
Okay.
Yeah, like with a lot of these things, it really depends on where someone's at. Like I take apple cider vinegar like with probably 2 meals a day. I would take it more, but like it does have some effect on the enamel in your teeth. So I'm just, I am mindful that I want to keep my set for a little bit longer. So I take berberine normally at lunchtime, and that kind of helps. I get enough of the ACV, gut health, um, antimicrobial, and in like insulin benefits, and then I take berberine with my meal. at lunch. But you could take berberine at each one. ACV is not for everybody. It's got a bit of a tangy taste. I've quite I've quite grown to like it, but most people don't like the smell or the taste of it, which is totally fair.
And would you vary that dependent on the meal type? So like if you're having a carb heavy or a protein heavy or a fat heavy meal?
Yeah, carb heavy meals and low protein meals will definitely spike your insulin more. Um, but yeah, like I just take them with most meals, to be honest with you, because I just find
Sure.
little support in that area. Like I'm always just trying to help my body process and be as insulin sensitive as possible. Another thing that works absolute wonders, and they've done studies on this, and metformin, which is what most people on diabetes get prescribed to, walking for 10 to 20 minutes after your meal within like a 10 to 15 minute time frame drops your blood sugar spike by up to 50%, which is just and it improves digestion, and obviously you get some steps in to like offset some of what you've like it's like immeasurably one of the best ways to help with your insulin. Like so if you break it down into simple steps, it's like if you did something before your meal, like ACV or berberine, you then change just some of the quality of your carbohydrates and the amount and added in some protein and then decided to go and have a walk afterwards. Now you've changed the whole landscape on what each individual meal is doing, the spike of the insulin, how much stress comes with it, and now you're just constantly in fat burning and muscle building um, that zone and signaling your body to stay anabolic comparatively to if you do nothing, smash, a whole bunch of processed carbs with no protein, don't take any supplements, and then just sit down for 2 hours and then go, oh, I'm a bit tired, I'll just have a cup of coffee. And those small habits stack up. Like, honestly, I find when you manage things like insulin, you can do half the amount of effort and you get double the results because your body's not constantly fighting against itself. Because when insulin's out of control and blood sugar's out of control, your body's stressed and it's constantly like, well, I better go and deal with this because it's really important. It's kind of like, burning fat's a nice byproduct. Like, I don't have time for this. Muscle, please, that's not getting built today. I'm clearly too busy doing other things. So that's why we can flip the script and be like, no, insulin's really important. The byproduct will be the body, the energy, the feeling that most people want.
Nice. Perfect.
Uh, Thank you for joining me today. I hope we've learned something around insulin so that we can be the key takeaway is be as insulin sensitive as you possibly can. It's not that insulin is quote unquote bad. It's just that the foods that we're eating and the lifestyle that we're living is chronically spiking the insulin, which just has a myriad of a cascade that we just don't want. And it impedes almost everything that we actually want, whether it's body comp or optimal health. Um, so yeah, implement the strategies that we've talked about today, and I hope that helps. And until next time, keep living better.